This is a story I've wanted to cover for some time. In May of 1991, a bearded man dressed in a brown leather jacket, boots, silver-rimmed sunglasses, and a big cowboy hat walked into the American Federal Bank, the one right next to the West Airport Freeway in Irving, Texas. When he approached the young female bank teller, he slid a note that read, quote, "This is a bank robbery. Give me your money, no marked bills or die packs." It might as well have been just another transaction between the bank and a client. There was no shouting, no finger guns pointed from inside of the jacket, and from what the teller could see from her window, no getaway driver. The teller, who handed over the cash from the drawer, watched as the bank robber, who the FBI would later call Cowboy Bob, calmly walk from the lobby to the parking lot, get into his 1975 two-door Pontiac Grand Prix, and drive off. When the FBI watched the surveillance tape, they knew they were dealing with a professional. Cowboy Bob kept his head down so the security cameras could not get a clear shot of his face. Cowboy Bob stayed silent as the teller took the money from the drawer. Cowboy Bob did not run to his car, nor did he speed out of the parking lot, which, if he had, would have surely drawn attention. What the FBI would eventually notice, after Cowboy Bob successfully hit several more banks, was that he wore his cowboy hat backwards, and his beard was fake. They figured that the robber wore a disguise. But what they didn't figure was that Cowboy Bob wasn't even a man. Cowboy Bob was a 46-year-old woman who loved smoking cigarettes and drinking Pepsi out of a coffee cup. Cowboy Bob was a woman named Peggy Jo Tallis. The story of Peggy Jo, a classic good-hearted Texas woman, as Texas Monthly would say, her pivot to robbing banks and eventually a final standoff with FBI agents and local Texas police officers is a fascinating look at a middle-aged rebellion, as well as the lengths people are willing to go to survive and provide, and whether there's such a thing as a harmless crime. Cowboy Bob became an outlaw icon in the 1990s, and according to one FBI agent, could have been one of the greatest bank robbers in history. But like all good heists, let's start at the beginning, with Peggy Jo Tallis. But before we start there, I want to start by saying hello everybody, and welcome to the cowboy bank robber that never was. I have brought this story up in at least 2, I think 3 different videos over on Wendigoon. I mean, it's just such a fascinating story, and the concept sounds like something you'd hear out of an Old West legend. A woman who puts on a fake beard and robs banks is Cowboy Bob. But the fact that this happened in the 90s is incredible, and it went on for as long as it did. So we're going to talk about Peggy's story, why she decided to start robbing banks, and how the FBI's investigation culminated in a very bloody final moment, and why that investigation itself took so long in the first place. So if all that sounds interesting to you, then stick around after the ad as we talk about the story of Peggy Jo, aka Cowboy Bob. Something that shouldn't be worth getting in a fight over is wireless phone bills. If you've ever looked at your bill and thought, I'm probably getting ripped off, then you're probably right. That is, of course, unless you're with today's sponsor, Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile's network covers 98% of Americans on 5G. The plan starts at just $15. That could be hundreds back in your pocket every year. Most carriers charge you for the data that you never use, but with Mint Mobile, you pick exactly what you need, with plans offered in 5 gigabytes, 15 gigabytes, 20 gigabytes, or unlimited data. You can use your own unlocked phone or grab a new one through Mint Mobile. Either way, your phone number comes with you, meaning no starting over and no switching over all your contacts. Most people think switching to a new provider is a headache, because often it is. But Mint made it easy. You can sign up and activate in minutes with their eSIM from wherever you are, meaning no storefronts and no salespeople. 96% of Mint users rate themselves as highly satisfied with customer care, and all of their plans come with a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee. You use your phone every day, so the thing that runs it shouldn't be a detriment. And now, it doesn't have to be. You can shop plans at the link in the description at mintmobile.com/Wendigang. That's mintmobile.com/Wendigang, mintmobile.com/Wendigang. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 gigabyte plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Thank you to Mint Mobile for sponsoring the channel. Their link will be in the description, and we are now back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. The youngest of 3 children, Peggy Jo Tallis was born on June 6, 1944 in Kaufman, Texas. When Peggy Jo was 4 years old, her father Pete died of cancer. Her mother Helen, who worked as a nurse's aide, was left to support the family. Friends close to the family described Peggy Jo as a, quote, free-spirited teenager who loved doing things other kids didn't do. For example, as a teenager, Peggy Jo once drove her friend Karen Jones around town looking for stray dogs to adopt. Unlike her sister Nancy, who was a majorette in high school, and her brother Pete, who played on the basketball team, Peggy Jo had a more unconventional high school experience. After her sophomore year, she dropped out. According to Karen Jones, Peggy Jo told her, quote, there was just too much else to do in life than spend so many days in school. While her former classmates were turning in homework, getting ready for prom, or looking at colleges, Peggy Jo got in her car and drove to San Francisco during the heyday of the Beat Generation, which was a literary subculture movement with strong ties to the city by the bay. When Peggy Jo returned to Texas, she gifted Karen a book of poems by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, an influential beat poet whose writing emphasized anti-establishment and the emptiness of modern life. Key characteristics of beat literature include themes of liberation, a rejection of consumer culture, and raw depictions of the human condition. It's possible that Peggy Jo's time in San Francisco, immersed within this culture, planted the seeds for a life of rebellion. During her 20s, Peggy Jo moved to North Dallas and worked as a receptionist at a Marriott hotel. One of her co-workers, a blonde woman named Cherry Young, recalls Peggy as someone who lived in the moment. She was spontaneous, and according to Cherry, quote, Peggy Jo didn't have any immediate plans to get married and have children. Finding the right career, she didn't worry about money. The two went out nearly every night to hit all the Dallas nightclubs. They went to concerts to see iconic bands like The Doors, the Doobie Brothers, and the Rolling Stones. They went to coffee shops to see amateur poets on stage, and they saw movies. For Peggy Jo, one movie in particular became her favorite, and she watched it over and over again. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The 1969 Western buddy flick starred Paul Newman and Robert Redford, who played famous train robbers on the run. The character's MO would mirror Peggy Jo's when she robbed banks. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid would never hurt the innocent, and they only stole from institutions that took advantage of the helpless. Or at least, in the movie. This would be the blueprint, or at least some moral code that Peggy Jo would later adopt during her robberies. Despite not wanting to settle down, Peggy Jo did have a dream that she was saving up for. Cherry Young said that Peggy Jo wanted to live in a hacienda on a beach in Mexico. She would need something more than a receptionist's salary, however, and Jones recalled one afternoon when the two of them drove past a Wells Fargo armored truck. Peggy Jo said something that caught Cherry's attention. She said, quote, I could go rob that and not have to worry about anything for a while. Cherry told Peggy that she would need a gun, to which Peggy Jo responded, quote, oh heck, I'm smarter than that. But even before her bank robbing days, Peggy Jo had her run-ins with the law. One time, when she was pulled over for speeding, Peggy Jo ripped up the ticket and laughed in the officer's face. Another time in Fort Worth, Cherry and Peggy got into an argument. When Cherry went to another bar to cool down, Peggy Jo noticed a pickup truck with its keys still in the ignition. Peggy opened the door and drove off. When she was caught by the police, Peggy Jo pleaded guilty and got hit with a 5-year probated sentence. While that dream of a future in Mexico wearing bathing suits every day remained just a dream, life, unfortunately, had other plans for Peggy. In the mid-1970s, Peggy drove to a town near Dallas to visit a man she was seeing. The two had been dating for several months, and when Peggy came to surprise him, she noticed his parked car in front of a business and saw a woman getting into the driver's seat. When Peggy approached the woman to ask what she was doing, the woman responded, quote, well, ma'am, this is my husband's car. Peggy Jo was stunned to learn that she was dating a married man. Soon after, in the early 1980s, Peggy Jo moved in with her mother, Helen, in an apartment in Irving, Texas. Her mother, who was battling a degenerative bone disease, was left bedridden and required around-the-clock care. Peggy Jo, who was coming out of her recent heartbreak, focused all her attention and money on caring for her mother. It would seem that the pain of the betrayal from a married man had caused irreparable damage, and Peggy Jo would stay single for the rest of her life. The next few years were difficult for Peggy, who was approaching 40. Her and her brother Pete, with whom she had frequently argued with in their younger years, now hardly spoke to each other. An injured back and an emergency mastectomy had kept Peggy from working her current job as a driver for the Pony Express courier services. Instead of delivering packages around Dallas, she, not unlike her mother, had to rest in bed. But the contributing factor that forced Peggy into a life of crime was the fact that she was struggling to keep up with her mother's increasing medical expenses. Helen's social security checks and Peggy's income just barely paid the bills. To cope, Peggy Jo took an anti-anxiety medication. And for the former carefree girl who dropped out of high school to hang out with poets in San Francisco, Peggy didn't bother asking for help. She was an independent spirit who, according to her friend Cherry, always helped others. Maybe Peggy Jo realized that a hacienda on a beach in Mexico would never happen, that her life was slipping away, and she was stuck under the immovable weight of being her mother's caretaker as she herself was falling apart. Years later, Peggy's lawyer would characterize his client as a woman under intense strain. The lawyer argued that the emotional attachment Peggy had to her mother, as well as Peggy's distressed mental state, clouded her judgment, which led her to robbing banks. At this point, it had been years, or over a decade, since Peggy Jo felt wild at heart. She missed that feeling. And now, she had to summon that wild spirit in order to help her ailing mother. So, going back to where this story began. After Cowboy Bob robbed the American Federal in May of 1991, Steve Powell, an FBI agent who specialized in bank robberies, spoke with employees of the bank. After the interviews and rewatching the security camera footage, Powell knew he wasn't dealing with an amateur. Although not as dramatic as the bank heist scene in the movies, where the robber waves a gun in the air and tells everyone in the room to get on the floor, or blows up a vault door or tunnels under the bank, Cowboy Bob's use of a note helped prevent Peggy Jo from talking, which could have been used for evidence. In addition to keeping her head down and directly away from the cameras, Peggy Jo kept still as the teller read her note. Ironically, for someone dressed as a cowboy with a big hat, boots, and sunglasses, the heist itself was without any theatrics. The only odd thing that stood out to FBI agent Steve Powell, who grew up in Tulia, a small panhandle town between Amarillo and Lubbock, was that the robber's cowboy hat was on wrong. Of course, this wasn't enough to catch them yet, but later that year, in December, Cowboy Bob hit a bank in Irving. This time, it was the Savings of America. After seeing Cowboy Bob steal $1,258, an eyewitness was able to get the license plate number of the robber's Grand Prix. When Powell and the FBI tracked down the plate's owner, they found themselves at a house close to the bank with a lady in the living room. She was neither Peggy Jo nor Helen, and when she disclosed to the authorities that she didn't even leave the house all day, the woman directed them to her car outside, a red Chevrolet with a missing license plate. The FBI was left outsmarted, believing they had a real lead, only to find out that Cowboy Bob had been using stolen plates. Cowboy Bob quickly struck another bank a month later, this time in the city of Garland, which was on the opposite side of Dallas from Irving. In her now infamous disguise, Peggy Jo walked out of the Texas Heritage Bank with $3,000. She wouldn't rob another bank until May of 1992, 5 months after the one in Garland, and it was almost her last. When the bank teller at the National Bank in Mesquite handed Cowboy Bob the $5,000, they had hoped the criminal would ignore a stack of bills that hid a small die pack. Cowboy Bob recognized the trap and wisely slid the bills with the die pack back to the teller. For those that don't know, die packs are placed in bank money on occasion. In the case that they're taken away from the bank without being removed, they explode, causing dye to get all over the money, ruining the currency, and potentially the robber, making them easy to identify. Meanwhile, on the other side of the law, Steve Powell and the FBI had gotten nowhere in the investigation. To catch Cowboy Bob, the law would need Peggy Jo to make a monumental mistake. And fortunately for the FBI, that mistake would happen 4 months later. In September of 1992, Cowboy Bob robbed the First Gibraltar Bank in Mesquite, Texas, and walked away with $1,772. Soon after, police officers swarmed the bank, followed by FBI agents. Similar to the Irving robbery at the Savings of America, authorities had followed up on a lead and tracked down the license plate that was seen on Cowboy Bob's Grand Prix. But when they came to the Mesquite residence associated with the plate, their lead once again hit a dead end. The resident went outside to find that his license plate had been stolen. As Powell and the FBI agents were finishing up their investigation of the First Gibraltar Bank, they got a call from Mesquite's First Interstate Bank, which was a mile away. Cowboy Bob, or as the caller described him, quote, a man in a beard, cowboy hat, a leather coat, and gloves, had struck again, this time with a considerably larger haul, $13,706. The teller added that the robber looked pleased with this particular robbery and gave the teller a salute as he left, his gloved hand tipping the cowboy hat. But this time, as Peggy Jo took off in her Grand Prix, her grave mistake came to light. She had failed to replace the real license plate on the Grand Prix with the stolen one. She had likely taken off the stolen plate after the first Gibraltar bank robbery that day, and realizing she needed more money, went to rob the first interstate bank in Mesquite. So, okay, the license plate thing, like stealing license plates, is a good idea. There's so many of these guys, like when I made the video about the Rangers bank robbery on this channel, like one of the first group videos we did on this channel, I talked about how they got caught because they didn't take their own front license plate off of the car, and that just let the police drive to the house, right? That's like bottom tier stupid. And then you have people that want to go all out, like the Miami-Dade shootout, the unknown robbers that I talked about over on Wendigoon, or the unknown gang, unknown bandits, whatever they were called. Those guys would just straight up kill people and steal their cars, and then once that car was made, just kill someone and steal another one. That's still a better idea than what the Rangers did, and I know I'm talking about murdering people is a better idea. We're within the realm of crime, okay? Bear with me. That's still a better idea than what the Rangers did, because at least, you know, you're not driving your own car to the bank that has a million cameras. But killing people is also super high profile and puts you into a whole other bracket of crime and investigation. So that adds a whole nother layer of risk to kill people to get their cars. And in Peggy's situation, where she's totally on her own, stealing cars probably isn't viable. Because, I mean, then you could get caught, you know, hijacking a car or breaking into one in a parking lot. Because then the car gets reported stolen, and then you could get caught just driving around, let alone performing a robbery. So stealing the license plates is a good move where the owner probably won't realize they're stolen until it's too late, especially if you do it like the day before a robbery. So credit where it's due there. And I understand also putting your own plates back on, right? Because you can't leave the stolen plates on that the police are now looking for, because you could get arrested anywhere, and you can't drive around without plates because then you get pulled over and the whole thing's busted when you weren't even committing a crime. So it's smart to keep your own plates and to then switch them out after the robbery. But if you're going to be so good at that, why on God's earth, when you decide to rob another bank, is it suddenly too cumbersome to just switch the license plates back? You need one screwdriver, and you just need to unscrew and rescrew 2 screws. There's the possibility that she wasn't thinking about it, that she got out of the first robbery, realized she didn't have enough money, and then was like, oh, well, you know, bank closes in 5 minutes, better get over there. But wait, like a day? Just go 24 hours later? It's crazy to me in these situations, like any bank robbery story really, that they'll be awesome at it for a few months, and then they'll just like accidentally take a selfie with the timestamp and then leave the phone on the floor for the police to find. Or the like here, like, oh, I have this whole license plate scheme thought out. The police can see me and never know it's me. They don't even know they're looking for a woman. I've got it on lock, only for you to forget all of that and just give them your home address. I mean, I guess it's good for everyone else that they have lapses in judgment, but, you know, if you're going to do something, do it right. Anyway, when Powell and his agents tracked down the license plate from the witness at the bank, they traced the Pontiac Grand Prix to its owner, Peggy's brother, Pete Tallis. When they confronted Pete at his job at a Ford Auto Parts factory and asked him about the car, he said he'd given it to his mother Helen and his sister Peggy a little over a year ago because they couldn't afford one. After hearing from the agents that his Grand Prix was used in a bank robbery, Pete responded, quote, "Bullshit, that car can't go fast enough." I mean, that is a funny response. Like, he hears bank robbery and assumes it's like a Fast and Furious scenario, when really it was the opposite. She was pretending to be an old man and very calmly, like, 3-point turned out of the parking lot. Pete gave Powell and the FBI the address of the apartment where Helen and Peggy lived, and when the authorities pulled up to the residence, they spotted the brown Pontiac parked in the lot. As they planned their next move, Powell saw a woman in a t-shirt and shorts walk towards the car. It was Peggy Jo. Powell assumed she was Cowboy Bob's girlfriend. The FBI watched but stayed in place as she drove the car from the parking lot, concerned that Cowboy Bob might be watching from the apartment window. Once she turned the corner, however, more agents stopped Peggy Jo. Powell approached the car and introduced himself. Peggy was polite, said hello, and told him that her name was Peggy Jo Tallis. Confirming Powell's information, she claimed ownership of the car from Pete and told Powell she had used the car that morning to buy fertilizer from a local nursery. And when they opened the trunk, they saw the bag of fertilizer. It seemed she was telling the truth. Powell requested to search the apartment, hoping to catch Cowboy Bob holed up in a closet. Peggy Jo paused. She told them that, aside from her sick mother, no one was inside. When the agents rang the doorbell, Helen slowly got herself up from the bed and opened the door. She screamed as the FBI barged in, guns drawn. I mean, to the FBI's credit, they think there's a serial bank robber hiding in the house using his girlfriend as a distraction. They turned the apartment over, but found nothing. It really goes to show, if it wasn't for that stupid license plate decision, how good Peggy could have thrown off the police for who knows how long. She could have robbed a dozen banks, and as long as she got a new plate each time, they'd have no idea what to do. I mean, they have her pulled over and they're searching her house and are still completely clueless that they've already got their guy/girl. As they went into Peggy Jo's room, they found her bed perfectly made, with clean clothes hung neatly in the closet. They did not find anybody else in the apartment. One agent, however, noticed something unusual: a mannequin's head made out of styrofoam on a shelf in the closet, and a beard was pinned to it. Next to the beard, a cowboy hat. They decided to keep searching the room. Under Peggy Jo's bed, they found the most damning evidence of all: a big bag full of a lot of money. Which, yeah, I'd say that's it's pretty open and shut. Powell demanded Peggy tell them where Cowboy Bob was, and she told him that there was no such thing. Peggy Jo promised that there was no man. But when Powell looked closer at Peggy Jo Tallis, he noticed, quote, spots of gray dye and the faint splotches of glue above her lip. And that's when it finally hit him. Peggy Jo Tallis was Cowboy Bob. I'll be damned, Powell said as he handcuffed the outlaw. Cowboy Bob was more like Cowgirl Barbara. Wow, I bet Randall's proud of that line. Or Davis. It could have been either one of them, really. Powell was in disbelief, as you could imagine. The last person he had ever suspected was a seemingly pleasant woman, a dutiful daughter caring for her ailing mother. And if not for Peggy Jo's slip up with the license plate, who knows how long the FBI would have been left looking without a clue. When word got out that Peggy Jo Tallis was the infamous Dallas bank robber, the media went into a frenzy. The story was something out of a Hollywood movie, a quote, cross-dressing bank robber who used her mother's apartment as a hideout, which is kind of a sensational way to state it, but I guess technically true. The only people more stunned than Steve Powell were Peggy Jo's family members. One relative, Michelle, who kept her last name confidential, had no idea that her aunt was a bank robber. As far as Michelle knew, Peggy Jo was a wonderful, loving woman who used to babysit her and her brothers. They'd play funny games that Peggy invented. They'd cook popcorn, and then later in the evening, Peggy would regale the children with ghost stories. To her family, Peggy Jo was someone who never drove over the speed limit and who always came to a complete stop at a stop sign. But to the world, she was a serial bank robber, the female version of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Or I guess just the female version of Butch Cassidy, or the female version of the Sundance Kid. I don't think both. Maybe both. Who knows? While in custody, Powell wanted to know everything about Peggy Jo's process. He wanted her to talk about how she learned to rob banks, particularly the events that led to her capture. Why did she decide to rob 2 banks in one day? And why didn't she steal another license plate before robbing the second? You know, the things that I ask. Powell wondered if the woman was getting cocky, her ego blinding her from thinking the FBI would ever catch her. But whatever the answer, Peggy Jo refused to cooperate. She didn't indulge in Steve Powell's questions, nor did she speak much to her attorney, who was appointed by the court. When a psychologist, Richard Schmidt, was brought on to evaluate Peggy Jo, Peggy admitted that she robbed the banks to pay for Helen's prescriptions. And as she smoked her cigarettes, Peggy Jo told him that she had no intention of robbing a second, third, or even a fourth bank. When pressed as to why she continued robbing banks after the first one, Peggy shrugged. She had no answer for the psychologist. Just as it was difficult for Peggy to admit that she had needed financial help all those years ago, it was possible that she couldn't articulate or was reluctant to admit the truth. That maybe she enjoyed being a bank robber. But even if that was the truth, Peggy was smart enough to keep that to herself. During the trial, her defense attorney claimed Peggy's criminal behavior was out of line with character, with which the judge agreed. Peggy Jo also never once lied to the FBI or Steve Powell, and she had committed the bank robberies without using a weapon. As a result, she received a 33-month sentence, which was considered mild. I mean, yeah, there's not a ton of people who rob 4 banks and get less than 3 years in jail. The difference in sentencing between robbery and armed robbery is a lot. To put the crime into context, during this time, the general profile of a bank robber was usually a man seeking drug money. According to Texas Monthly, quote, "It is estimated that women commit less than 5% of some 7,600 bank robberies each year in the United States. This estimate has risen only minimally, as 2023 saw 1,362 bank robberies, and of these, only 106, or 13%, involved a female perpetrator." And keep in mind, that's not saying lone female perpetrator. That's saying a female involved, as in they could have been a getaway driver or forced to do it. Peggy Jo was an anomaly amongst her criminal peers, which is perhaps why she was given less of a harsh punishment. When Powell and the FBI agents learned that Peggy Jo pleaded guilty to bank robbery and was sentenced to prison for almost 3 years, they figured that this would be the last they'd hear from her. After all, when they apprehended her at her apartment in 1992, they saw that she was neither an addict nor an alcoholic. Powell believed that Peggy was going through some middle-age crisis. While serving her time in federal prison in Bryan, Texas, a true crime writer contacted her to see if she would be interested in collaborating on a book to sell to Hollywood for money. But Peggy Jo, out of not wanting to further embarrass her family, politely declined. I will say, I mean, I get it, not wanting to embarrass the family, yeah, blah, blah. But if she needs money, that's a really easy way to make it. Go to jail for less than 3 years and then come out and sell a story to Hollywood for like $1 million bucks? Seems like a pretty reasonable deal to me. Her niece, Michelle, visited. Despite being unhappily confined to a cell all day, Peggy Jo smiled during the visit and asked Michelle about her and her daughter. Quote, "She didn't say anything to me about the bank robberies. She just said it was something that would never happen again." It would seem that Peggy Jo was determined to put that part of her life behind her. Seem being the operative word. By the mid-1990s, Peggy Jo Tallis was out of prison and living with her mother in a 2-bedroom townhome in Garland. During the day, Peggy tended to her mother, whose condition had worsened. Helen was barely able to hold her own silverware. In the evenings, Peggy bathed her mother and helped her to bed. Later, she would put herself to sleep by watching nature documentary shows on television until the late hours of the night. As someone with a felony record, Peggy had few legitimate employment options and kept a low profile from the public. She spent some time working as a telemarketer and made cold calls for a few hours a day to sell home decorations. She later worked at the Harbor Bay Marina, located outside of Dallas at Lake Ray Hubbard, as a cashier. Peggy Jo sold her customers everything. Coolers, minnows for bait, keychains that floated in the water, high luxury stuff. She was a stellar employee, according to Susie Leslie, a manager at the marina. Quote, "Not once did the money in the cash register come up short on her shift. Most of all," Susie noted, "the former outlaw was especially attentive to the marina's poor customers. For example, if a family couldn't pay for bait, she would use her own money to help cover it. Oftentimes, a Vietnamese woman came to the marina to catch fish for her family's dinner, and Peggy would keep the woman company. She also wrote down questions she had for a deaf customer, asking if he needed anything else from the marina. When Susie asked Peggy Jo why she was so giving with her own money, Peggy Jo replied, quote, "Well, we all got a past, Man, that kind of got me a little bit. It's so... I thought this was going to be a funny bank robber story. Now it's sad. Why can't bank robbers just be funny? I can't think of a movie right now where they're funny, but I'm sure there is. Why can't they be like the bandits from Home Alone? That would have been funnier, right? But now I'm just sad over someone who had a really hard go of life. There wasn't really a lot of options, but they came out of it with a positive perspective despite everything. And now I'm sad. Remember that scene in Home Alone 2 where the brick lands on his head? That's funny, right? Let's think about that. Peggy Jo had opportunities for a social life, but turned them down. Occasionally, a man would come to the marina to ask Peggy if she'd like to join him for a drink at the local bar nearby. And every time she was invited, she refused, saying that she needed to go home to care for her mother. Instead of giving love another shot, Peggy swept the floors, walked around the docks to watch the sunset, then walked to her car. Maybe another time, she'd tell the man. Peggy Jo eventually lost touch with Cherry and Karen, and her sister Nancy died of breast cancer. And in December of 2002, Peggy Jo's mother, Helen, who had been such an instrumental factor in her life, died in her sleep. As harsh as this may sound, the truth is that the obligation that had dictated Peggy Jo's life for decades was no more. At Helen's funeral, the two surviving children, Peggy and Pete, buried their feud along with their mother. She even went to Pete's house for Christmas dinner and spent time with her in-laws. When Pete asked his sister what she planned to do now that her mother had passed, Peggy didn't have any idea. Or if she did, she didn't tell him. In 2004, 2 years after Helen's passing, Peggy Jo purchased a Frontier RV from the man at the marina for $5,900 in cash and told Susie it was time to move on. She planned to head down to Padre Island on Texas's southern coast of the Gulf of Mexico, or maybe even finally live out her dream in a hacienda on a beach in Mexico. Peggy invited Susie to join her, and she remembered her saying, quote, "Come along while I have the chance, before life runs out on us." I'll never forget Peggy Jo saying that, before life ran out on us. Susie declined, and Peggy Jo sold all of her belongings in the townhome and hit the road in the RV. She spent a few weeks near Lake Ray Hubbard at a public park where she fished during the day and walked the shore. Her niece Michelle would sometimes visit in the afternoon. The two would sit on folding chairs outside, and Michelle would talk as her aunt drank Pepsi and smoked cigarettes. Michelle, quote, "couldn't help but admire her, doing her own thing and doing it her way. She loved being completely free." At the end of summer that year, Peggy Jo had left the area completely. The last correspondence she had was with Carla Dunlap, a woman who she had befriended at the marina. When Carla was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2003, Peggy Jo would make sure to check in every day with her, and even brought her a cap to wear when chemotherapy caused Carla's hair to fall out. The last voicemail Peggy Jo left Carla was a farewell. She was about to hit the road, and no matter what happened to her, she wanted Carla to know that she loved her. Thinking something bad was going to happen due to the ominous nature of the message, Carla's husband John went to the park to look for Peggy, but she was already long gone. Nobody knows where Peggy Jo went after that summer of 2004. Some witnesses have claimed to have seen her at Lake Texoma and Lake Lavon. Others spotted her RV in some East Texas towns. And in October of 2004, some people saw Peggy Jo in the city of Tyler. Around the same time, the Gelardi Bank on the south side of the city was robbed. The robber was described as, quote, "an older man with a round stomach and a scraggly mustache. He wore a dark floppy hat, baggy clothes, and gloves." The teller was verbally instructed to put all of the bank's money in a green canvas bag that was placed on the counter. No bait pills, no dye packs. The robber and an undisclosed amount of cash walked out of the bank and got away. When the FBI interviewed the teller, she said she was surprised by the softness of the robber's voice, as if it were a little feminine. More so, the mustache looked fake and glued on, as was the stomach. It seemed to be padded more than a real gut. By this time, Steve Powell had retired from the FBI, but if he were still an agent, perhaps he could have helped his former employer. Instead, he was living on a ranch where he taught seminars to bank employees on how to identify potential robbers. At the end of all his seminars, Powell would tell the employees about Cowboy Bob and pass around a photo like a man recalling his first love. As for the active FBI agents who were brought onto the case, well, they decided to interview every male suspect with a lie detector test. Each of the suspects passed and were subsequently released, and the FBI agents, just like Steve Powell, could not conceive that an RV-driving 60-year-old lady was the culprit. Even Peggy Jo's family had no idea what she was up to, and the latter part of 2004 until the early months of 2005 saw occasional calls from a payphone to tell them she was doing fine. In fact, on May 4th of 2005, Pete Tallis was in Kaufman County, located east of Dallas, and heard from someone that Peggy Jo's RV was parked near a lake on a farm that happened to be owned by a relative. When Pete pulled up to the farm, he found her there, and the two siblings caught up for an hour. Peggy Jo brought out family photos from an old box, and according to Pete, the two had a great time. As they said their goodbyes, Pete hugged his sister and asked if she was okay. Peggy Jo told him she was very happy, that she'd see him later. Unfortunately for Pete and everybody else, that would be the last time they would see or hear from Peggy Jo ever again. On May 5th, 2005, the morning after the Tallis siblings reunited and looked through old family photos, Peggy Jo woke up and made her bed. Instead of neatly ironed blue jeans or blouses that hung from two wooden rods, Peggy Jo decided to wear a black, long-sleeve shirt and a pair of black pants from a plastic drawer. She opened a plastic bag full of makeup and put some lipstick on. She brushed her graying hair as she made her way to the front of the RV. wore various sunglasses and wide-brimmed hats, sat next to a pair of black wigs and hair extensions. Peggy Jo, she had done so over a decade ago, put on a disguise again. She settled on a large black straw hat and thick black sunglasses that covered most of her face, and drove through Tyler, Texas. Peggy Jo parked at a Jack in the Box and exited the RV with a black satchel and walked across the street to Guarantee Bank, the same one she had robbed last October. Peggy Jo approached the teller and said, quote, "This is a robbery. I need all your money. Don't set any alarms." The teller emptied all $11,241 from her drawer. Peggy Jo's heart began to race. This amount would finally give her the financial freedom to get to Mexico and live her dream. No doubt, caught up in the adrenaline and the high stakes of the moment, Peggy Jo made a crucial mistake. She forgot to check for a dye pack. As soon as Peggy Jo walked out of the bank, the pack exploded and covered her and the money with red ink. Red smoke rose from her satchel as she made her way towards the RV, narrowly avoiding traffic on the way. Peggy Jo's satchel might as well have been the smoking gun, and it caught the attention of a nearby working crew. A couple also noticed Peggy Jo walking in disguise and immediately called 911. But, once again, they couldn't distinguish if the robber was a man or a woman. FBI agents soon heard the police radios crackle with news of a bank robbery and were in pursuit. And what was a fortunate coincidence for the FBI, they just happened to be close by, in their cars looking for suspects following a recent string of 3 other bank robberies. Along with the FBI, state troopers from the Department of Public Safety and local police departments followed behind her RV, where Peggy Jo found herself in a high-speed chase. Well, it was an RV, not exactly high speed, but a chase nonetheless. While trying to go uphill, the RV wasn't able to go beyond the speed limit, and curious citizens could see exhaust pouring from the tailpipe. Even the young couple, who told their children in the back seat to keep their heads down, followed along the chase, which, yes, is reckless, and yes, especially if you have kids in the car, you don't know if bullets are going to be flying or what. Bad idea. I would probably do the exact same thing. I have a kid now, but if I see a bank robbery and I see the chase happen, if I'm not getting in anyone's way, and if I know my family's safe, I am 1,000,000,000%. Like, whatever I had to do for the rest of the day, schedule's cleared. I have to follow. Peggy Jo made one final attempt to make an escape when she slammed her brakes and squealed the RV into a quiet suburb at the edge of Tyler. She turned the RV once more, this time onto Irish Moss Drive, where police vehicles sped past her and boxed her to a stop. As the authorities surrounded the RV, they drew their weapons and waited for the robber to come out. One of the residents on the street grabbed his video camera to film the standoff. Back in the RV, Peggy went to her bedroom where she kept 2 pistols. One of them, a toy gun, and the other, a .357 Magnum loaded with hollow point rounds. She grabbed the toy. Outside, officers waited, unsure of who exactly was in the RV. The police dispatcher reported the suspect was a, quote, white female, but because of the recent robberies, the police believed that there could be other members inside the RV as part of a bank robbing gang. When Peggy Jo opened the door, the officers were shocked to see a woman in a wide-brimmed hat. She could have been one of their grandmothers. Peggy Jo shouted, "You're gonna have to kill me." One of the young officers told her that she didn't have to go through with the standoff. Later, this officer would be recommended for counseling by his superiors for the guilt that would soon follow. Peggy Jo asked, "You mean to tell me if I come out here with a gun and point it at y'all, you're not going to shoot me?" The police officers pleaded with her not to do that, but Peggy Jo didn't listen. She stepped out of the RV, the toy pistol in her hand. As she lowered the toy, 4 police officers fired their guns at her. As she lay on the ground, Peggy Jo mustered up enough strength to remove her sunglasses. In her final moment, she lifted her head to feel the soft breeze of a light May morning. She closed her eyes and died under a young sweet gum tree with the soft sound of birds chirping. Peggy Jo died just like the characters in her favorite film, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, who famously died at the end of that movie in a gunfight with police. After going through the RV, believing accomplices were inside, authorities found a perfectly made bed, a small bag of marijuana, $38 in cash in her purse, and her driver's license. Steve Powell was at his ranch when the FBI called. Peggy Jo Tallis was dead. How many other banks did Peggy Jo rob? And how far back did those robberies begin? And most importantly, why did Peggy Jo Tallis return to the Guarantee Bank after robbing it just 7 months prior? Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid robbed the same train twice. Was this a case of life imitating art? As these questions piled up, Curious minds in the media tracked down her family members, but they didn't have answers either. Even her brother Pete could not make sense of his sister's crimes. Surely Peggy Jo had to know that if she was in some kind of financial jam again, we would have helped her out. But Peggy Jo's friend Cherry Young understood. She knew the carefree spirit went out doing what she loved. Harking back to those wild nights in Dallas during their 20s, Cherry said she often wished she could write Peggy Jo a note of her own, saying, "Good for you, my sweet Peg, good for you." Around 30 of Peggy Jo's relatives came together for a private burial service at Kaufman. Stories were shared. Michelle told the group about a wounded duck at the marina that Peggy Jo adopted and named Bernice. Another family member read scripture and was adamant that as his aunt was in the RV, ready to confront the police, quote, Peg was making peace with God. The story of Cowboy Bob and Peggy Jo Tallis has endured because it doesn't have a tidy explanation. She wasn't a monster or some violent offender. She had an unfortunate situation that many people face today. A lack of resources, a lack of ability, and a lack of power in any of it. And decided to finally take matters into her own hands the only way she knew how. Maybe the alternate identity of Cowboy Bob allowed her, albeit briefly, to have all three. When Steve Powell received the call about her tragic end that day, his response was, "Say it ain't so." When put into context, the crimes committed seem harmless enough. I mean, who wouldn't turn to desperate measures in order to provide for their sick mother? By donning the disguise of Cowboy Bob, Peggy Jo Tallis turned a series of self-justified choices into a role that bore out into fate. The lines between her true identity and the costume she wore seemed to blur, a moral gray in between the absolutes of black and white. But it was Peggy Jo's final act of going out in a blaze of glory that became her full circle moment and secured her legend. And despite her alter ego of Cowboy Bob, this is who she always was. She was unyielding and uncompromising, willing to die on her own terms rather than suffer the pain of living under someone else's. And it's hard to think of her in that final robbery as Cowboy Bob saluting the teller that she wasn't right where she wanted to be. And for someone who was dealt such a bad hand in life and someone who wasn't willing to hurt others to climb back up, it's hard to not want to salute her right back. A lot of the details of this story are heartbreaking. It's hard to not think of her in those months after her mother passed, taking care of a wounded duck, nursing it back to health, taking care of people who come into the marina with financial problems, saying everybody's got a past. It's hard to not see that as someone who really had a different perspective, who didn't appreciate the position they were in. And then finding that, their life was near its end, and perhaps that time as Butch Cassidy was the only time she really felt alive, the only time in years that she felt that free spirit she was when she drove to San Francisco on her own. It's hard to not think of that girl without some level of admiration, regardless if you think her choices were okay or not. Like I said earlier, you're a lot more successful in these things if you steal from people, if you steal cars, if you hurt people to take their things, but all she ever stole was a license plate and money from a bank. She never brought a gun to any of these crimes, and even in those final moments when she knew the police were approaching her with lethal force, she brought out the toy gun, ensuring that no one else would get hurt besides the only person she wanted to hurt, herself. I mean, she never wanted to be in a cage made by anyone, and going back to prison wouldn't have suited her. It's a heartbreaking story of someone getting a horrible deal out of life, but instead of breaking the law or hurting someone else to get back at the world, she just did something for herself. Is it okay to rob banks? Obviously, no. But I also think it'd be hard to look at this story without some sympathy, at least without some amusement for a girl in a fake beard and a backwards cowboy hat making money the only way she wanted to. And that should do it for the story of Peggy Jo Tallis, or Cowboy Bob. Like I've said, I've wanted to talk about this case for a while, but this video is the first time I've really heard the details of it. I think it's an incredibly fascinating story and certainly one worth talking about. So hopefully you all enjoyed, and we just want to say thank you for watching. I'm glad that you all have appreciated a lot of the videos we've put out recently, going into some more obscure topics, but in the future, at least for the next several uploads that are planned in the pipeline, I want to cover a lot of stuff that I would kind of cover on the main channel, like bank robberies or conspiracy theories. A lot of you really seem to like the Havana Syndrome video, and I did too, so more stuff kind of like that. But I appreciate that you guys click on the videos regardless of the topic a lot of the time, and that really does mean a lot. New uploads here Mondays at noon, new videos weekly over on Wendiglitch, and videos whenever I can figure out how to upload them over on Wendigoon. Everyone who made this video possible will be credited in the description. Be sure to show them some love, especially Vincent for the research and Davis for the script writing on this. I think they knocked it out of the park. And all in all, I believe that should do it for now, but before I go, we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye. You know, that's really the most heartbreaking part about surveillance culture, right? Not the, multinational conglomerates taking away our freedoms by spying on us every second of the day and the technology we own. Not that. The fact that now bank robbers just can't be fun anymore, because like if Peggy Jo had done that today, there would have been like a dozen cameras in the restaurant she would park the RV at that could see her coming and going, and then there'd be another camera outside of someone's house and like a Ring doorbell that would see her stealing the plates. And now people just have to shoot people, and that's way more lame. I think there should be exceptions if they have funny costumes. We should turn off the cameras for that. Not actually, I don't, but legally I do not support that. That's a joke in Minecraft. Thank you.